When my phone slipped from my hand that morning, it wasn't because of my age or clumsy fingers. It was because 4 words had just shattered everything I believed about my family. Only special people. That was what Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, had said to me with a smile so sharp it felt like a blade across my heart. They had married yesterday, she said. A secret wedding, a beautiful ceremony with champagne toasts and family portraits. But I hadn't been there. Me, the woman who had paid their rent for 3 straight years, who had furnished their apartment down to the very sofa Vanessa now lounged on, who had stocked their refrigerator when their pantry was bare. I wasn't a special person. For a moment, the silence in my living room was deafening. My son, Daniel, sat there staring at the floor like a boy caught in a lie, refusing to meet my eyes. And I stood frozen, gripping the phone as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. In my closet upstairs hung a pale pink dress I had chosen weeks before, the dress I imagined wearing proudly at Daniel's wedding. The new shoes were still in their box, and a crisp white envelope with $1,000 in cash, the wedding gift I had saved from my pension, lay untouched in my dresser. All useless, all meaningless, because the most important day of my only son's life had happened without me. I had imagined that day so many times. I told my sister Helen in Chicago about the upcoming wedding, bragged like any proud mother would. I scrubbed my house spotless, thinking maybe they'd return after the ceremony for a small celebration. I had made plans, down to the kind of cake we'd eat together. But instead of memories, I was left with humiliation. Instead of joy, I had 4 poisoned words echoing in my mind. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to make Daniel look me in the eye and tell me why his mother, the woman who raised him alone after his father died, had been excluded. But all he offered was a rehearsed excuse. It was intimate, Mom, just us and the witnesses. A lie so fragile it couldn't survive the weight of truth. Because I had already seen the photos. I saw Vanessa's parents grinning, glasses of champagne raised high. I saw her siblings lined up like honored guests. I saw the gleam of her wedding ring, a ring I had unknowingly financed with the $800 I had given her last month under the pretense of personal expenses. The betrayal burned deeper with every detail. For 3 years, I had lived like a servant to their comfort. Rent, $500 a month. Groceries, medical bills, car repairs. Always me, always my money. I had eaten beans and rice so they could have steak. I had given up vacations, hobbies, even simple pleasures, just to keep them afloat. And yet, when the day came that should have been the proudest of my life, they erased me completely. Standing in my own home, watching Vanessa stretch out casually on the sofa I had bought, I realized something terrible. I had paid for my own humiliation. I had purchased my invisibility with every check, every transfer, every sacrifice. That was the moment, the exact moment, when something inside me cracked. The obedient, accommodating mother I had been for years suddenly felt like a stranger. My love had been used as currency, and my presence had been treated as disposable. And for the first time in decades, I asked myself a dangerous question. What if I stopped paying? That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the pale pink dress hanging uselessly in the closet, the dress I had once imagined would shine proudly in photographs that would last for generations. Now it mocked me like a cruel joke. My hands shook as I reached for my checkbook and a pile of bank statements I had been avoiding for years. For the first time in 3 long years, I was not going to close my eyes to the truth. I was going to count every dollar, every cent, every sacrifice I had made in the name of family. I wrote in shaky handwriting, rent, $500 each month, 36 months. The numbers grew mercilessly under my pen. $18,000. Groceries, at least $200 a month, $7,200 more. Birthdays, Christmas, anniversaries, $3,000. Medical emergencies that somehow always coincided with their vacations or shopping trips, $800. The car loan that Daniel promised to repay but never did, $2,500. The air conditioner that broke in their apartment one July, and somehow it was me who paid, $600. The living room set where Vanessa had lounged that morning, $1,200. By the time I stopped writing, the total stared back at me like a verdict, $33,400. I dropped the pen. The number was more than money. It was years of my life, chunks of my retirement, slices of my independence. It was the vacation I never took to see the Grand Canyon, the piano lessons I never resumed, the dinners out with friends I always declined. It was all the small and large pieces of me that I had carved away to keep Daniel and Vanessa comfortable. For a moment, grief washed over me, grief for the woman I used to be, the young widow who raised a son alone, who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, who once believed that her sacrifices would build a bond unbreakable. I had been so proud when Daniel graduated, when he got his first job, when he met Vanessa. I thought all my struggles had been worth it. But what had I really created? A man who could look away while his wife told his mother she wasn't special. The more I stared at that number, the more something inside me hardened. My tears dried, replaced by a heat I had never felt before. Anger. Not the explosive anger of a moment, but the slow-burning fury of a woman who finally recognizes the bars of her own cage. For years, I had lived under the illusion that love could be bought, that loyalty could be secured with monthly transfers and just one more favor. But those 4 words, only special people, ripped the blindfold from my eyes. I walked to the mirror in the bathroom and forced myself to look. The reflection was familiar, yet different. Tired eyes, silver hair, wrinkles earned from decades of work and worry. But behind them, something new. A steel I hadn't seen since I was a young mother fighting to survive after Thomas died. For so long, I had buried that strength under compliance, telling myself it was love. Tonight, it was clawing its way back. And then came the quiet, the dangerous quiet of realization. If I could pour $33,000 into their lives, I could just as easily pour it into my own. If I could live on beans and rice so they could feast, then I could live simply for myself, not for their demands. For the first time in decades, I wondered what my life would look like if I stopped feeding their endless hunger. I returned to the table, placed my hand flat on the stack of bills, and whispered aloud, "No more." The words felt foreign, trembling on my lips, but powerful. I said them again, louder this time, "No more." It was as though the walls of my house, which had borne silent witness to every humiliating phone call, every drained checkbook, every fake thank you, were finally listening. That night, I lay down without checking my phone for messages from Daniel, without wondering whether Vanessa needed gas money or a new prescription. I closed my eyes not as a provider or a silent servant, but as a woman on the edge of something terrifying and exhilarating. Freedom. Tomorrow, I would act. Tomorrow, I would walk into the bank and end the cycle. But tonight, for the first time in years, I belonged to myself. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. My eyes had only closed for a few hours, but I felt strangely alert, as if some unseen clock had been ticking inside me all night, urging me to move before it was too late. The words I had whispered to myself the evening before, "No more," still echoed in the silence of my bedroom. For the first time in years, I didn't reach for the phone to check messages from Daniel or Vanessa. For the first time in years, I didn't wonder whether they had gas in their car, food in their fridge, or rent money ready for the landlord. I thought only of myself, and that thought alone gave me more strength than any cup of coffee ever had. I dressed with unusual care, pulling out a navy blue suit that had been pushed to the back of my closet, a relic from the days when I had worked at the insurance office downtown. The fabric was a little dated, but it still held its shape, and more importantly, it held a version of me I wanted to remember, the professional, capable woman who had raised a son alone and still managed to stand tall. I brushed my hair back, pinned it neatly, and looked in the mirror. The tired eyes were still there, but behind them now flickered a spark of determination. I wasn't going to the bank as a confused old woman. I was going as a woman reclaiming her dignity. The air outside was brisk, autumn leaves crackling under my shoes as I walked to my car. The streets were already busy with people rushing to work, students lugging backpacks, shop owners raising shutters. For years, I had been part of this bustle only when errands for Daniel or Vanessa demanded it. Trips to the bank weren't for me. They were to wire money. Visits to the grocery store weren't for my table. They were for theirs. Even the pharmacy had been about Vanessa's prescriptions or Daniel's forgotten vitamins. But today was different. Today I was walking into the world for myself. The bank stood at the corner of Main and Lincoln, a solid brick building with tall glass doors that I had entered countless times before. Mr. Samuel Pierce, the branch manager, had known me for years. He had seen me every month, sometimes more than once, authorizing transfer after transfer, watching as my account quietly bled into Daniel's. Each time he would greet me politely, never questioning, never judging. But I had often wondered what he thought, seeing a widow in her 70s so faithfully funding the lives of two adults who seemed never to stand on their own. As I pushed through the doors, the familiar scent of polished wood and printer ink met me. The hum of low voices and clicking keyboards filled the lobby. I walked straight to the receptionist and asked for Mr. Pierce. Within minutes, I was ushered into his office. He stood from behind his desk, a kind man with graying hair and glasses, and offered his hand. "Mrs. Hayes," he said warmly, "it's been a while. What brings you in this morning? Another transfer for your son and daughter-in-law?" The words stung, not because he meant harm, but because they had become my identity in this place. The woman who came to transfer money. The mother who gave and gave and gave. "Not this time, Samuel," I said, surprising even myself with the steadiness in my voice. "Today I'm here to cancel all automatic transfers to Daniel and Vanessa Hayes, permanently." He blinked, caught off guard. "Cancel? All of them?" "Yes, every single one. And I want to make sure there is no access, no linked accounts, nothing that allows them to reach into my finances again." He sat back slowly, adjusting his glasses. For a moment, he studied me with the kind of concern people reserve for someone standing at the edge of a cliff. "May I ask what's happened?" "What's happened," I replied, leaning forward, "is that I finally opened my eyes. For 3 years, I have been draining my retirement, the inheritance my late husband left me, every ounce of savings I had, all to support 2 grown adults who treat me as though I am disposable. They excluded me from their wedding, Samuel. I found out about it from photos online. And yet yesterday, Vanessa still had the nerve to call me about rent as if nothing had happened. So no, I am done. There will be no more." For a long moment, the office was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then Samuel nodded, slowly but firmly. "Mrs. Hayes, I've seen many kinds of transactions in this job. Parents helping children through college, grandparents saving for their grandchildren's futures, people covering emergencies. But what I've watched these last years was something else. I always worried you were being taken advantage of, though it wasn't my place to interfere. If you are ready to stop, then I will help you stop, completely." He turned to his computer, typing with practiced efficiency. I watched the screen reflect in his glasses, rows of numbers and account codes. With each click of his keyboard, I felt lighter, as though invisible chains were being unlocked one by one. My heart pounded, but not from fear, from liberation. "Here we are," he said at last. "All automatic transfers have been canceled. Your accounts are secure. I recommend adding an extra layer of protection, password changes, security questions, perhaps even moving a portion of your funds to a new account they don't know about. We can do all of that today if you wish." "Yes," I said without hesitation. "All of it. Every precaution you can think of. I want to be certain that my money, my life, is safe from their hands." While he worked, my phone buzzed in my purse. Once, twice, 3 times. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Daniel, then Vanessa, then Daniel again. They must have already sensed something was wrong, as if the lifeline they had been sucking from was suddenly cut. I let it ring, a smile tugging at my lips for the first time in days. I didn't owe them an answer. When Samuel finally slid the papers across the desk for me to sign, I took the pen with steady hands. The weight of my signature on those pages felt heavier than any transfer I had ever made. It wasn't money leaving my account this time. It was control returning to me. As I stood to leave, Samuel looked at me with a softness that nearly broke me. "Mrs. Hayes, forgive me for saying this, but you look different today. Stronger, lighter." "I feel different," I admitted. "For 3 years, I thought giving them everything was the same as loving them. I see now it was only teaching them to use me. That ends today." He nodded. "Then today is the first day of the rest of your life." Walking out of that bank, the world looked different. The autumn air was sharper, the colors brighter. The weight that had pressed on my shoulders for years seemed to lift with every step. I wasn't naive. I knew Daniel and Vanessa wouldn't accept this quietly. They would be angry, maybe furious. They would call, plead, manipulate, maybe even threaten. But for the first time, the thought didn't scare me, because I had done something monumental. I had chosen myself. As I slid into my car and started the engine, my phone buzzed again, Daniel's name flashing on the screen. I let it ring until it went silent, then turned the volume off altogether. With my hands steady on the wheel, I whispered to myself once more, "No more." And this time the words didn't tremble. They roared. That afternoon, as the late autumn sun dipped behind the maple trees lining my street, I returned home with an unusual calm. The air smelled of fallen leaves, my steps felt lighter, and for the first time in years, I carried no groceries for Daniel and Vanessa, no envelopes of cash, no burden of someone else's needs. I had coffee in my hand, a small treat I bought for myself, and I intended to savor it in silence. But as I turned the corner, my heart nearly stopped. 3 cars were parked in front of my house, Daniel's dented sedan, Vanessa's flashy SUV, and a third one I didn't recognize. Through the front window, I could see shadows moving inside. My stomach twisted. I had given them keys years ago, trusting them, foolishly believing they would one day protect me. Now that trust was being weaponized. I took a deep breath, steadied my hand on the doorknob, and walked in. The scene inside felt like a violation of every safe corner of my life. Daniel sat hunched over on the sofa, his face buried in his hands. Vanessa paced like a caged lioness, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. At my dining table, a man in a gray suit flipped casually through my private papers. Bank statements, insurance documents, even the will I had locked away in a folder. What is happening here? My voice came out louder than I expected, firm, cutting through the room like a whip. All 3 of them turned as though I were the intruder in my own home. Vanessa's face lit up with false relief. "Margaret, thank God you're here," she said, using the sugary tone I had come to recognize as pure manipulation. "We need to talk. This is Mr. Sutton, from the family law firm we consulted. He's here to help with your situation." "My situation?" I stepped closer, snatching my papers from the stranger's hands. "I'm doing perfectly fine, and these are my private documents. You have no right to go through them." Daniel finally raised his head, his eyes bloodshot, his voice practiced. "Mom, we're worried about you. Your behavior lately has been strange, cutting off the transfers without even explaining, not answering our calls. We think maybe you're under too much stress. Maybe loneliness is affecting you more than you realize." I stared at my son, the boy I had once carried on my hip, the man who now looked at me not with love, but with calculation. His words weren't his own. They were rehearsed, planted. Vanessa stepped closer, trying to take my hand. "Sweetheart, confusion is normal at your age. We just want to make sure you're cared for." The word confusion hit me like an alarm bell. Now I understood. They weren't here to comfort me. They were here to brand me incompetent, to strip me of my independence, to turn me into a puppet while they pulled the strings of my bank account. "I am not confused," I said, my voice sharp as glass. "I am clearer than I have been in years, and you are going to leave my house. Now." Mr. Sutton, the lawyer, stepped forward, his tone dripping with professional condescension. "Mrs. Hayes, please, There's no need to be upset. We've prepared some documents, a simple power of attorney that would allow Daniel and Vanessa to manage your finances until you're feeling better. It's standard procedure in cases like this. He slid a folder across the table toward me. I didn't open it. Instead, I picked it up, walked to the trash can, and dropped it in. The sound of paper hitting plastic was louder than any gavel. The only transition happening here, I said, is yours, to the front door. Vanessa's mask cracked. Her eyes blazed, and her voice lost all pretense of sweetness. You can't do this to us, Margaret. We've built our lives counting on you. The rent, the car payments, the credit card you co-signed, we made commitments because we knew you would always help. You owe us. Owe you? My voice rose, steady and full of years of swallowed rage. I have paid your rent for 3 years. I have fed you, clothed you, financed every whim while you excluded me from your lives. I owe you nothing. Daniel stood, his face contorted, the child in him resurfacing in anger. Mom, this will end badly. You'll regret it when you're alone, when you really need someone to take care of you. I looked at him, my heart breaking and hardening at once. Daniel, I am already alone. The difference is that now it's by choice, not neglect. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then, slowly, they gathered themselves. Mr. Sutton scooped his papers from the trash. Vanessa muttered curses under her breath. Daniel avoided my eyes. They walked to the door, their dignity fractured. Just before leaving, Vanessa turned, her face cold as stone. This isn't over. We'll find another way. Do whatever you must, I said, opening the door wide. But you will not do it here. Not in my house, not with my life. As the door shut behind them, I leaned against it, trembling but unbroken. My hands shook, my pulse raced, but inside me something fierce had awakened. They thought they could bully me into surrender, into signing away my freedom. Instead, they had handed me clarity. This was no longer just a family dispute. This was a war, and I was ready to fight. The next morning, I woke with a heaviness in my chest, but also a clarity sharper than I had ever known. The confrontation in my own living room still played in my head. Daniel's pleading, Vanessa's venom, the lawyer's smooth lies. For years I had tiptoed around their moods, weighed every word, bought peace with dollars. But last night, for the first time, I hadn't backed down. I had stood my ground. And if they thought that scene was the end of it, they were wrong. It was only the beginning. As sunlight crept through the curtains, I dressed quickly and made a list on a yellow notepad. Locks, security system, new bank account, legal protection. It felt almost military, step by step, line by line, building a defense against my own blood. The thought hurt, but hurt was no longer going to paralyze me. It would propel me forward. My first stop was Harris Hardware, a place I had visited countless times before, but never for myself. In the past, I went there to pick up screws for Daniel's apartment, paint for Vanessa's projects, tools for their endless demands. Today, for the first time, I walked through those doors, not as their errand runner, but as a customer buying for my own protection. Mr. Walter Harris greeted me with his usual familiarity. Mrs. Hayes, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. Another emergency at your son's place? Not this time, Walter, I answered firmly. This time it's for me. I need every lock in my house changed. Best quality you have, and I need it today. He raised his brows but asked no questions, only nodded and began pulling catalogs. As we reviewed options, his son Ethan walked in, a tall young man with an easy smile. Walter introduced him as the one who now handled security systems. Ethan installs cameras, full setups, alarms, you name it. Something inside me clicked. Providence, I thought. Ethan, I said, I don't just want new locks. I want cameras. A system that alerts the police if someone tries to break in. Price doesn't matter. What matters is peace of mind. The young man nodded seriously, no trace of amusement in his eyes. We can install everything tomorrow morning. By the end of the day, you'll be safer than you've ever been. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I exhaled deeply. Yes, I thought. Tomorrow my house will no longer be theirs. On my way home, I stopped at a small cafe. As I sipped coffee, my phone buzzed with blocked numbers, desperate voicemails, pleas that no longer pierced me. I ignored them all. When I looked up, I noticed a woman watching me from the corner table. She had kind eyes and gray hair pulled into a neat bun. When I left the cafe, she followed me outside. "Mrs. Hayes?" she asked gently. "I'm Patricia Monroe. I live next door. I don't mean to intrude, but yesterday I heard shouting from your house. I worried. Is everything all right?" Her voice carried no judgment, only genuine concern. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. Not in weakness, but in relief. Here was a stranger, practically, who showed more care than my own son. "Patricia," I said, "come over this afternoon. I'll make coffee, and I'll tell you everything." Later in my kitchen, we sat across from each other. I told her the whole story. The secret wedding, the exclusion, the years of financial drain, the confrontation with the lawyer. She listened without interruption, her eyes glistening. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Margaret, you did the right thing. 5 years ago, I went through the same with my daughter. She used me, drained me, manipulated me. When I finally said no, she threatened to cut me out of her life. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it saved me." Her words were balm to my raw soul. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't alone. That evening, I called my sister Helen in Chicago. For months, I had avoided her, embarrassed by how much I gave Daniel and Vanessa, how I disguised financial reports as family news. But now I spoke freely, telling her every detail. She was silent for a moment, then sighed. "Margaret, I'm glad you've finally seen the truth. Every time we talked, it broke my heart to hear you boast about what you gave them. Not once did I hear Daniel say he loved you or missed you. It was always about the money. And Vanessa, she spoke of you only in the future tense. When Margaret is gone, we'll remodel her house. When we inherit, we'll invest. They've been waiting for you to die to really live. It's sick, but it's the truth." The words stabbed me, but like medicine that burns as it heals, they cleared the infection of denial. They hadn't just used me. They had already erased me in their minds. That night, I sat by my window, watching the street lamps flicker. In the distance, Daniel's car drove slowly past, then Vanessa's. They didn't stop, just circled, like predators waiting for weakness. But I no longer trembled. My defenses were going up. New locks, cameras, legal shields, and most importantly, a heart no longer willing to be exploited. I wasn't the same woman they had mocked as not special. I was becoming someone else. Someone stronger. Someone who understood that freedom required walls, not of isolation, but of boundaries. And this time, those walls were mine to build. 2 days after the locks were changed and the new cameras gleamed discreetly on my porch, I began to think I might finally have some peace. The phone calls had slowed, blocked numbers no longer rattled me, and Patricia stopped by each evening with a mug of tea and a word of encouragement. For the first time in years, I was building routines that belonged only to me. I painted, I gardened, I even laughed. But peace, as I learned, rarely lasts when money is involved. It was a Friday morning, the kind where the light feels soft and forgiving, and I had just settled into breakfast when the doorbell rang. I glanced at the camera monitor by the kitchen counter. A young woman stood on my porch, well-dressed, holding a folder and flashing a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. My stomach clenched. This wasn't a neighbor. This wasn't a friend. I opened the door cautiously. "Good morning, Mrs. Hayes?" she asked, showing me an ID badge. "I'm Laura Whitman, a social worker with the Office of Senior Services. We've received reports that you may be in an at-risk situation. I'm here to conduct a wellness check." The words hung heavy in the air. Reports. At risk. I didn't need to ask who had filed them. "May I see your ID again?" I asked, my voice steady though my hands itched to tremble. She obliged, and the card looked official enough. "May I come in?" she pressed gently. "It shouldn't take long." Every instinct screamed at me. This was the next move in Daniel and Vanessa's campaign. If they couldn't bully me into signing over power of attorney, they would drag the government into my living room and try to have me declared unstable. "You may sit," I said carefully, leading her into the living room, "but before you ask a single question, I need to call my attorney." Her smile faltered. "Mrs. Hayes, this isn't a legal interrogation. It's just a wellness check. If you have nothing to hide. That phrase. If you have nothing to hide. It was the same manipulative reasoning abusers always used. I lifted my chin. If I have nothing to hide, then I certainly have nothing to fear from having my lawyer present. I dialed Charles Bennett's number and explained in clipped sentences. Within 20 minutes, he was at my door, his briefcase in hand, his face carved from stone. "Miss Whitman," he said after confirming her credentials, "any investigation of my client must respect her legal rights. She is represented, and any attempt to corner her into statements without counsel present constitutes harassment." She shifted uncomfortably, but tried to recover. "We have reports from concerned family members," she repeated, "that Mrs. Hayes has shown sudden changes in financial behavior, withdrawn from loved ones, and installed unnecessary security measures. These could be signs of confusion or exploitation." Confusion? I finally spoke, my voice clear. "I stopped bankrolling 2 adults who excluded me from their wedding. That's not confusion, Miss Whitman. That's common sense." Charles laid a folder on the table. "Here are the documents proving my client's financial stability, tax payments, investments, all current and in order. Here are medical records showing she takes no prescription medications, only vitamins. And here," he added firmly, "is evidence of financial exploitation, over $33,000 drained in 3 years under emotional pressure." The social worker scanned the papers, her expression stiffening as reality clashed with the narrative she had been fed. "Mrs. Hayes," she asked finally, softer now, "do you manage your own finances?" I gestured toward the paperwork. "Every check, every bill, every transfer has my signature. I drove myself to the bank this week to cancel those transfers. I manage it all." "Do you live independently?" "You're standing in my clean house. You can check the refrigerator, the laundry, the garden. I cook, I drive, I shop. I don't rely on anyone to get through my days." She hesitated then. "Do you feel isolated, lonely?" I thought of Patricia, of Helen on the phone, of the garden club ladies I had just begun meeting. I felt lonely, I admitted. But now I'm building relationships with people who value me, not my bank account. I am not isolated, Miss Whitman. I am free. Charles added, "My client underwent a full cognitive evaluation last week with Dr. Elaine Foster. The results show she is not only competent, but exceptionally sharp for her age. That report is available to the court if needed." For the first time, the social worker's polished confidence cracked. She closed her folder and looked at me with something that resembled shame. "Mrs. Hayes, based on this conversation and the documentation provided, I see no reason to pursue further action. I will close this case." As she walked out the door, I caught a glimpse of Daniel's car creeping slowly down the street. Vanessa in the passenger seat, their faces taut with expectation. They had probably been waiting for the moment the government declared me incompetent. Instead, they saw Miss Whitman leave with empty hands. I almost wished I could have waved at them through the window, just to let them know I had won this round. When the door clicked shut, Charles and I sat in silence for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Margaret, they're not done. This will escalate, but you've proven today that you are stronger than their lies." I nodded, the tremor in my chest finally easing. For years, I had been treated like a frail woman who needed their help. Today, I had shown them and myself that I was anything but. It happened on a Thursday morning, crisp and clear, when I thought maybe the storm had passed. For nearly 2 weeks after the visit from the social worker, the house had been quiet. My phone rang less often, the cameras showed only passing cars, and I had even begun painting again. Bright tulips spreading across the canvas like a promise of renewal. I dared to believe that perhaps, finally, Daniel and Vanessa had given up. But hope is fragile, and mine shattered the moment Charles Bennett, my attorney, knocked on my door with an expression that chilled me. He didn't even wait to sit down before placing a thick envelope on my table. "Margaret," he said gravely, "I'm afraid they've filed a formal petition. Daniel and Vanessa are asking the family court to declare you mentally incompetent. They're requesting that a legal guardian be appointed. Daniel himself." The words landed like stones in my chest. I had prepared for this possibility, but hearing it spoken aloud was still like being punched in the gut. Does that mean they could take control of everything? My voice cracked despite my resolve. If a judge agrees, yes, Charles admitted, he could grant Daniel full authority over your finances, your property, even your medical decisions. It's the most aggressive step they could take. I sank into my chair, staring at the envelope as if it might burst into flames. What evidence could they possibly have? You've seen me. You know I'm competent. Charles opened the file and pulled out pages one by one. They've built a narrative, Margaret. According to this petition, you've been behaving erratically. They claim you've stopped paying bills, hoarded medications without taking them, and refused to undergo psychiatric evaluation. They've lined up 3 witnesses to support these claims. Vanessa, of course, your neighbor across the street, Mr. Jennings, and your pharmacist, Anthony Wells. My head snapped up. Anthony? No. He knows I don't take anything stronger than aspirin. Charles nodded grimly. I believe he was misled, likely tricked into signing something he didn't fully understand. It happens more than you'd think. As for Jennings, his testimony is vague. He describes you yelling at Daniel and Vanessa in the street, installing cameras as if preparing for war, and entertaining strange visitors. He's interpreting your newfound independence as instability. I felt heat rise in my chest. Strange visitors? Those are my friends, my support group. Women who've helped me find strength again. But of course he wouldn't know that. To him, a woman my age shouldn't have friends, shouldn't laugh, shouldn't protect herself. Charles laid a hand on mine. I know, Margaret, but in court, perception matters. We have to be ready to counter every one of these lies with documentation and credible testimony. I pressed my palms against the cool wood of the table, trying to steady myself. And Vanessa, what is she saying? Charles's jaw tightened. She's painting herself as the devoted daughter-in-law, heartbroken by your sudden decline. She claims you were like a second mother to her, that excluding you from the wedding was a misunderstanding, and that since then you've become paranoid, isolated, and hostile. She's very convincing on paper. For a moment, anger blurred my vision. I saw her smug smile the day she told me only special people had been invited, her hand clutching the sofa I had paid for, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she called me Mom. Now she was turning her cruelty into evidence, her lies into sworn statements. I stood and paced, the walls of my house closing in. They're trying to erase me, Charles, not just from their lives, but from my own. They want me silenced, controlled, locked away, while they drain what's left of my savings. That's exactly why we will fight this, he said firmly. We'll schedule a cognitive evaluation with Dr. Foster, someone with impeccable credentials. Her report will carry weight in court. We'll also gather testimony from those who know you well, your neighbors like Patricia, your sister Helen, even the hardware store owner and his son who installed your security system. They can all speak to your clarity and independence. I sat again, exhausted but fueled by something stronger than fear, defiance. Do you think we can win? Charles met my gaze. Margaret, the burden of proof is on them. They must prove incompetence beyond doubt. What they have is circumstantial, biased, and in some cases fraudulent. We have truth, documentation, and credibility. Yes, we can win, but it won't be easy. They're desperate, and desperate people fight dirty. I thought of Daniel then, not as my son, but as the man he had become. The boy who once brought me dandelions from the yard now sat across from lawyers, plotting to strip me of my dignity. A sadness deeper than words welled inside me, but I refused to let it drown me. If it's war they want, I whispered, then war they will have. Charles closed the folder and nodded. Then our next step is preparation. I'll file our own motions, request the court appoint Dr. Foster for evaluation, and start compiling affidavits from your supporters. In the meantime, document everything. Every phone call, every visit, every attempt at contact. The more evidence we have, the stronger we stand. After he left, I sat alone in the silence of my kitchen, staring at the papers that threatened to cage me. Outside, the wind rattled the last leaves from the trees, scattering them across the yard. I realized that in many ways this was my autumn too. Leaves stripped, branches bare, every weakness exposed. But beneath it all, the roots remained. Strong, unshaken. That night, I didn't sleep much. Instead, I walked from room to room, touching the walls, the furniture, the photographs of a life I had built with my own hands. This was my home, my sanctuary, my proof that I was more than their pawn. They could file all the petitions they wanted, parade false witnesses before a judge, but they could not take away the truth of who I was. I was Margaret Hayes. I was 71 years old, and I was still in command of my mind, my money, and my life. Charles wasted no time. The day after he delivered the crushing news about the guardianship petition, he called me with a firm plan. "Margaret," he said, "we need to secure indisputable evidence of your competence. Dr. Elaine Foster is one of the most respected psychiatrists in the state. I've already scheduled an evaluation with her this week. It will be long, detailed, and airtight. Once we have her report, we'll also begin gathering testimony from people who see you daily and can speak to your independence." The morning of the appointment, I woke early, nerves rattling my stomach like loose coins. It felt humiliating in a way to have to prove I wasn't insane. But I knew this wasn't about my pride. It was about survival, my financial survival, my personal freedom, even my identity as a capable human being. Daniel and Vanessa wanted to reduce me to a fragile old woman. I was going to show them and the court exactly who I was. Dr. Foster's office was in a quiet building on the edge of town. The waiting room smelled faintly of lavender, the kind of detail that should have soothed me but instead made my hands sweat. When she entered, a woman in her 50s with sharp but kind eyes, I immediately sensed both intelligence and fairness. "Mrs. Hayes," she greeted, shaking my hand firmly, "I've reviewed the basics of your case. Today, I'll be asking you questions and giving you some standard assessments. This isn't about tricking you. It's about clarity." For nearly 2 hours, she guided me through memory exercises, problem-solving tasks, and financial reasoning scenarios. She asked me to recall past presidents in order, to subtract numbers backwards, to interpret proverbs, to outline how I manage my monthly bills. I felt my mind flex like an old muscle, strong despite the strain. At one point, she looked up from her notes. "How do you handle your finances, Mrs. Hayes?" "I write every check myself," I replied. "I've balanced my checkbook for decades. Last week, I canceled automatic transfers at my bank, opened a new account, and changed my security codes. I know exactly how much I have and where it goes." "And why did you take those actions?" "Because I finally realized my son and his wife were using me, not loving me. They drained $33,000 from me in 3 years. I'm not confused, Dr. Foster. I'm tired of being exploited." Her pen paused for just a moment before she nodded and continued. When the evaluation ended, she leaned back and regarded me steadily. "Mrs. Hayes, your cognitive scores are excellent for your age, higher than many people 20 years younger. I see no evidence of decline. What I do see is resilience." Relief flooded me. One piece of the battle was secured. But Charles reminded me this was only the beginning. The court won't just rely on one expert. They'll look at patterns of behavior. That means witnesses, credible people who can speak to your daily life. And so the next week became a blur of phone calls and kitchen table conversations. Patricia, my neighbor, readily agreed to testify. "I've seen her cooking, driving, gardening," she said firmly. "Margaret is independent. She's sharp. If anything, she's stronger now than she was a few months ago." At the pharmacy, Anthony Wells looked pale when I confronted him. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm so sorry. Vanessa told me she needed information for your insurance. I never meant to imply you were mismanaging medications. Please, let me write a statement clarifying everything." Then came Walter Harris, the hardware store owner, who chuckled bitterly. "If anyone thinks you're confused, they should have seen how precise you were choosing locks last week. You knew exactly what you wanted, and you weren't taking no for an answer." His son Ethan added, "And she was the one who negotiated every detail of the security system. She's sharper than half my clients." Even Cynthia, the hairstylist at the salon, offered her support. "She comes in, tells me what she wants, asks about my kids, remembers details better than I do. That's not confusion, that's clarity. Each voice was like a brick added to the fortress I was building around myself. Lies could be loud, but truth had its own steady weight. At night, though, when the house grew quiet, the sadness seeped in. This wasn't a fight against strangers. This was a fight against my own son. I thought of the boy who once needed me to chase monsters from under his bed. Now he was trying to convince a judge that I was the monster, delusional, incompetent, unfit to guard my own life. Still, grief did not weaken me. It sharpened me. If Daniel wanted to drag me into court, then court would be the place where I drew the line. I was not walking in as a victim. I was walking in as a woman ready to defend not only her money, but her dignity. By the time Charles returned with the final report from Dr. Foster, stamped with official seals and glowing with her professional assessment, I knew the path ahead would be brutal. But I also knew one unshakable truth. I had more than enough strength, and more than enough truth, to face whatever came next. The courthouse loomed ahead like a cathedral of judgment, its gray stone walls towering against the pale morning sky. I had dressed in my best black suit, pressed the night before with trembling but determined hands. As I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror that morning, I told myself, today I am not just proving my sanity. Today I am defending my dignity, my life, and the decades of work that built it. Charles walked beside me as we entered the heavy double doors. His calm presence steadied my racing heart. The corridors buzzed with the low murmur of lawyers, families, and clerks. But to me it all blurred into a tunnel leading toward one battlefield, Courtroom 3B. When we stepped inside, my eyes immediately found Daniel and Vanessa. My son wore a suit too new to be familiar, his hair slicked back, his jaw clenched. Vanessa was dressed in black as though she were attending a funeral. Maybe in her mind she was, the funeral of my independence. Our eyes met only for a second. Daniel quickly looked away, but Vanessa's gaze locked on mine, cold and unyielding. It wasn't family I saw in her eyes. It was calculation. Their lawyer, a silver-haired man with a voice like silk and the confidence of someone who had won too many battles, opened the proceedings with a polished statement. "Your Honor," he began solemnly, "we are here because we love Mrs. Hayes. Sadly, we have witnessed a tragic decline in her mental capacity. She has withdrawn from her family, cut off essential financial support, and fallen under the influence of strangers who isolate her further. Out of love, her son seeks to protect her through guardianship." Each word was carefully chosen to twist my strength into weakness, my independence into paranoia, my boundaries into illness. Then came the witnesses. First was Vanessa. She stepped to the stand, her face pale, her eyes glistening with manufactured tears. "Your Honor," she began, her voice trembling, "Margaret has always been like a second mother to me. We shared holidays, dinners, memories, until recently. Over the past few months, she has changed completely. She lashes out, accuses us of things that never happened, and isolates herself. She even accused us of excluding her from our wedding, when in fact it was a small, private ceremony." Her crocodile tears fell, and she dabbed them with a handkerchief. The courtroom shifted, sympathetic murmurs echoing. I wanted to stand and scream, "Lies! You called me not special!" But I sat still, my knuckles white, trusting Charles to handle the storm. When he cross-examined her, his voice was calm but piercing. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "when was the last time you called my client without asking her for money?" Vanessa faltered. We always talked about many things. Please give the court a specific date." Her silence was deafening. "Is it true," Charles pressed, "that you and your husband held a wedding to which Mrs. Hayes was not invited?" Vanessa flushed. It was very small. "Did you, or did you not, tell her she was not invited because only special people were included?" Her lips trembled. Those words were taken out of context. "What possible context," Charles said coolly, "makes telling your mother-in-law she is not special acceptable?" The courtroom stirred, whispers rising. Vanessa's tears suddenly looked less convincing. Next was Daniel. Seeing my son swear to tell the truth before spinning lies nearly broke me. He spoke of my supposed decline, forgetting conversations, refusing to pay bills, surrounding myself with strangers. He painted me as paranoid, fragile, and confused. But Charles's cross-examination sliced through the performance. "Mr. Hayes, how much money have you received from your mother in the past 3 years?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know the exact figure." "Does $33,400 sound about right?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "She's always been generous." "How many times," Charles continued, "have you visited your mother without asking her for money?" The silence stretched so long the judge finally leaned forward. Daniel muttered, "I don't remember." "And is it true," Charles asked, "that you and your wife entered her house without permission and attempted to persuade her to sign over power of attorney?" Daniel's voice cracked. "We were worried about her." Charles raised a brow. "Worried enough to bring a lawyer and legal documents for her to sign?" The color drained from Daniel's face. The other witnesses followed. Mr. Jennings, the neighbor who had long resented my friends parking near his curb, describing me as erratic for installing cameras. Anthony Wells, the pharmacist, nervously admitted I had irregular medication purchases, though his words wavered under pressure. Each account was twisted, shallow, taken out of context. Sitting there, I felt exposed, as though my life were being dissected in front of strangers who didn't know me. But beneath the humiliation burned something harder: resolve. This wasn't the truth. This was theater, and I would not be their victim on stage. By the time the judge called for recess, I sat straighter than I had in years. The lies had been loud, but cracks were already showing. Vanessa's false sweetness had faltered under questioning. Daniel's entitlement had seeped through every word. Their story was built on sand, and soon our evidence would bring the tide. As I stood, Charles leaned close and whispered, "They played their hand, Margaret. Now it's our turn." I walked out of that courtroom, not as a broken old woman, but as a soldier ready for the second half of battle. They thought humiliation would weaken me. Instead, it had forged steel in my spine. When the judge called us back after recess, the air in the courtroom shifted. The first act of the play, Daniel and Vanessa's performance, was over. Now it was our turn, and Charles rose with quiet authority. "Your Honor," he began, "the plaintiffs have offered speculation, half-truths, and emotional theater. We are here to present facts." Our first witness was Anthony Wells, the pharmacist. He looked nervous as he took the stand, but his voice steadied as Charles questioned him. "Mr. Wells, did you sign a statement about my client's medications?" "Yes," he admitted. "But I was misled. Vanessa Hayes told me it was for an insurance form. In truth, Mrs. Hayes only purchases vitamins and aspirin. She has no prescription history that suggests neglect or confusion. The document I signed was misrepresented." The judge's pen paused. Already the narrative began to unravel. Next came Dr. Elaine Foster. Calm, professional, and precise, she testified about the 2-hour evaluation she had conducted. "Mrs. Hayes's cognitive performance is well above average for her age," she stated firmly. "She demonstrated strong memory, logical reasoning, and financial competence. In my professional opinion, she is fully capable of managing her own affairs." Then Patricia Monroe, my neighbor, took the stand. She spoke with quiet conviction about the afternoons we had spent together, the conversations we'd had, the garden we worked in. "She is independent, thoughtful, and far from isolated," Patricia said. "If anything, she has grown stronger in recent months." Walter Harris and his son Ethan testified about my determination when changing locks and installing the security system. "She knew exactly what she wanted," Ethan said. "No confusion, no hesitation." Finally, Charles called me to the stand. My legs trembled as I walked forward, but my voice did not waver. I told my story plainly. The $33,000 given over 3 years, the humiliation of being excluded from the wedding, the manipulation that followed. I stopped the transfers, I concluded, not because I was confused, but because I finally saw the truth. My money was welcome, I was not. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge's eyes lingered on me longer than before. When Charles finished, I returned to my seat lighter than I had felt in years. Whatever came next, The truth had finally been spoken aloud, not whispered in my kitchen, not buried in bank statements, but declared for all to hear. The courtroom had grown heavy with silence. After hours of testimony, some dripping with lies, others ringing with truth, everything now came down to closing arguments. The judge's eyes shifted to Daniel's lawyer, who rose with deliberate gravity, smoothing his silk tie before addressing the court. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is not about greed. It is about love and concern. Yes, my clients may have accepted financial help from Mrs. Hayes, but that is natural in a family. What is not natural is the sudden and complete withdrawal of support, the paranoia of installing cameras, the influence of new acquaintances who have driven a wedge between mother and son. My clients are not villains. They are children desperate to protect their mother from herself. They fear she is being manipulated, isolated, and pushed into decisions that place her well-being at risk. Guardianship is not a punishment. It is a safeguard." His voice softened as he gestured toward Daniel and Vanessa, who both bowed their heads like mourners. "Mrs. Hayes deserves safety, stability, and professional guidance. We ask the court to grant guardianship not out of selfishness, but out of love." Theatrics. Pure theatrics. I clenched my hands, resisting the urge to cry out. Then Charles stood. He didn't pace, didn't dramatize. He simply walked to the center of the courtroom and let silence settle before he spoke. "Your Honor, what we have witnessed today is not the case of a woman in decline. It is the case of a woman who finally found the courage to say no. The plaintiff's entire argument rests not on medical evidence, not on legal fact, but on disappointment. Disappointment that their endless stream of financial support has ended." He lifted a folder. "The plaintiffs claim my client has unpaid bills. Here are the receipts. Every utility current, every tax filed. They claim she mismanages medications. Her pharmacist testified that she requires none, and that his words were twisted into lies. They claim she is confused. Yet Dr. Foster, one of the state's most respected psychiatrists, testified under oath that Mrs. Hayes is not only competent, but sharper than many half her age. The only confusion here, Your Honor, is the deliberate distortion of truth by those who stand to gain financially." Charles's voice deepened, resonant now. "Guardianship is the most extreme measure a court can impose. It strips a person of her autonomy, her dignity, her very identity. It is meant for those who cannot manage their lives, not for a woman who canceled her own bank transfers, hired contractors for security, and sat before you today with clarity and strength. To grant this petition would not be to protect Mrs. Hayes, it would be to reward exploitation." He paused, letting the words hang. Then quieter, "Your Honor, love does not look like this. Love does not exclude a mother from her only son's wedding. Love does not ransack her house with lawyers. Love does not call her not special. Love does not try to steal her freedom. What we see here is not love. It is greed dressed in mourning clothes." The courtroom was still. Even Daniel shifted uncomfortably and Vanessa's jaw tightened. The judge leaned back, hands folded. His eyes scanned the room slowly before he spoke. "I have listened carefully to both sides. I have reviewed the evidence, the testimony, and the expert evaluations. The question before this court is whether Mrs. Margaret Hayes is competent to manage her own affairs." The pause stretched, every breath in the room suspended. "It is the judgment of this court," the judge continued, "that Mrs. Hayes is in full possession of her mental faculties. The petition for guardianship is hereby denied." Relief surged through me like a tide breaking a dam. My hands shook, but this time from triumph, not fear. The judge's voice sharpened. "Furthermore, the evidence suggests that this petition was motivated not by genuine concern but by financial interest. Let the record show that guardianship laws are not tools for greed. This court will not tolerate the exploitation of the elderly under the guise of protection." His gavel struck once, sharp and final. The trial was over. Daniel slumped in his seat, his shoulders heavy with defeat. Vanessa's face twisted with fury, her eyes cutting into me like daggers. But their power was gone. Their threats, their lies, their manipulation, it had all collapsed under the weight of truth. Charles touched my arm gently. "It's finished, Margaret. You've won." I nodded, unable to speak, tears stinging my eyes. Not tears of grief, but of release. For the first time in years, I felt unshackled. They had tried to strip me of everything, but I had walked out with more than I had walked in. With freedom, with dignity, with proof that I was stronger than their betrayal. As I left the courtroom, the sun outside was brighter than I remembered. The air was crisp, the sky impossibly wide. For so long, I had lived under a shadow of obligation, bending myself to their demands. But today I had stood tall. Today I had won not just a trial, but my life back. The days after the trial felt strangely quiet, like the world had exhaled a long breath I hadn't realized it was holding. For months, my life had been consumed by tension, court documents, lawyers, lies spun by the people I once called family. And now, with the gavel's strike still echoing in my ears, that weight was gone. I was free. At first, the silence unsettled me. I would wake in the morning expecting the phone to buzz with another demand, another accusation, another crisis. Instead, I found sunlight streaming through the curtains, coffee brewing in peace, and a calendar empty of obligations I never chose. Slowly, I began to learn what freedom sounded like. Birdsong instead of voicemails, the rustle of leaves instead of knocks at the door. One morning, I stood in the middle of my living room, looking at the furniture I had once chosen for Daniel and Vanessa, now sitting untouched, heavy with memory. I realized this house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It was a battlefield, haunted by their shouting, by the sting of betrayal. I needed a fresh start. So I called Charles. "I want to sell the house," I told him. "I want a place that belongs only to me, untouched by their shadow." Within weeks, the for sale sign stood in the yard. Strangers walked through the rooms where I had fought my hardest battles. But instead of sorrow, I felt relief. This house had served me, yes, but it had also chained me to years of sacrifice. It was time to let it go. With the money from the sale, I bought a small but beautiful apartment near the city center. The first time I stepped onto the balcony, I felt like I could breathe again. Below me, the hum of life pulsed. Cafes, bookstores, parks, all waiting to be discovered. For so long, I had lived on the edges of other people's needs. Now the world itself seemed to invite me to the center of my own life. I filled the apartment not with reminders of the past, but with colors and comforts that reflected me. Soft blues, fresh flowers, canvases and brushes waiting by the window. In the evenings, I painted while the city lights twinkled below, each stroke on the canvas a declaration. This is mine, my time, my space, my life. Patricia visited often, bringing homemade bread or a new book she thought I'd enjoy. Cynthia from the salon introduced me to her reading club. Walter's wife invited me to the community garden. Soon my circle grew, not of people who drained me, but of those who laughed with me, who asked nothing more than my company. And then there was Helen, my sister. For years, our calls had been stiff, overshadowed by my constant justifications for Daniel's demands. Now, when we spoke, it was as sisters again, two women sharing memories, advice, and laughter. One evening, she said, "You sound lighter, Margaret, younger, like the sister I remember from before." Her words made my chest ache with gratitude. For the first time in decades, I traveled. Paris, Rome, Vienna, names I had once whispered as dreams became stamps in my passport. I walked along the Seine at sunset, painted in Florence, sipped coffee in Vienna's grand cafes. Each trip was not just a journey outward, but a return inward, to the woman I had once been before. Obligation swallowed her whole. But it wasn't just about indulgence. With half of my savings, I donated to organizations that protect the elderly from financial abuse. I sat in meetings with other survivors, sharing my story, watching as younger volunteers took notes, determined to spread awareness. My pain became purpose. My scars became warnings that could save others. Some nights, standing on my balcony, I thought of Daniel, of the boy who once clutched my hand at the park, the teenager who laughed over burnt pancakes, the young man I believed I had raised to be good. I thought of Vanessa, with her icy smile and manipulative charm. Did they regret what they had done? Perhaps, perhaps not. But regret was no longer my burden to carry, because here in this new chapter, I finally understood. Love that must be bought is not love. A family that sees you as a wallet is not a family. And a life lived in fear of abandonment is no life at all. Now, each morning when I wake, I no longer check my phone in dread. I step out onto the balcony, breathe the city air, and remind myself, I am not just surviving, I am living. And for the first time in years, that is enough. Life in the city center opened doors I hadn't realized were waiting for me. No longer weighed down by constant demands, I had time, and more importantly, I had energy to step into the world again. It began with small steps. Patricia inviting me to the library book club, Cynthia introducing me to her circle of friends at the salon, Walter's wife encouraging me to join the community garden. At first I hesitated. For years I had lived as though my only purpose was to provide for Daniel and Vanessa. Social gatherings felt indulgent, almost foreign. But slowly I allowed myself to say yes. Yes to coffee with new acquaintances. Yes to evening walks with neighbors. Yes to conversations that weren't about money, but about books, movies, gardens, and dreams. The garden club, in particular, became a source of healing. Surrounded by women my age, and a few younger ones, I discovered I was not alone. Maria shared how her brother drained her savings until she set boundaries. Carmen admitted she had cut ties with her daughter after years of manipulation. Alfreda, wise at 80, told us she rewrote her will after realizing her grandchildren saw her as an inheritance, not a grandmother. Their stories mirrored mine, and in sharing, we laughed, cried, and strengthened one another. One afternoon, while planting tulip bulbs, Alfreda looked at me and said, "Margaret, you know what's worse than being alone? Being surrounded by people who pretend to love you but only want what you have." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle deep inside me. "At least now," she added with a smile, "when we're alone, we're in good company, our own." Those words stayed with me. Loneliness had once terrified me, but I realized the loneliness I had felt while constantly giving to Daniel and Vanessa was far heavier than the solitude I now experienced. My new friendships were built not on obligation, but on choice, not on transactions, but on trust. I began to look forward to mornings in the garden, afternoons at the cafe, evenings at the book club. My calendar filled with small joys rather than looming crises. For the first time in decades, I was surrounded by people who valued me for my voice, my humor, my presence, not my checkbook. Even the younger volunteers at the senior support group inspired me. They listened when I told my story, not with pity, but with determination to protect others like me. "You're stronger than you think," one of them said after a meeting. I realized then that my experience, painful as it was, had become more than just my burden. It was a beacon for others. Some nights, sitting on my balcony with the city lights shimmering below, I thought about how far I had come. From a woman begging for scraps of affection to someone embraced by a circle of genuine friends. From isolation under manipulation to belonging through choice. Trust, once shattered, had begun to mend. Not in Daniel and Vanessa, I no longer wasted hope there, but in myself and in the kindness of those who asked nothing but honesty in return. I had found my community, and in that community, I found myself again. It was late autumn when I realized that a full year had passed since the day Daniel and Vanessa told me I wasn't special enough for their wedding. The memory no longer burned like it once had. Instead, it felt like a scar, visible but no longer painful, a reminder of what I had survived and what I had gained. I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, a cup of tea warming my hands, the city lights flickering below, like stars brought down to earth. For decades, I had lived as if my worth depended on what I gave away. I mistook sacrifice for love, money for connection, obedience for peace. It took betrayal, sharp and undeniable, for me to see the truth. Now, with the night breeze brushing my face, I finally understood. True love is not bought, it is given freely. Family is not measured by blood, but by respect and freedom. Though it had cost me $33,000, sleepless nights, and the illusion of a dutiful son, was worth every price. I thought of Daniel sometimes, of the boy who once pressed dandelions into my hand and called me the best mom in the world. That boy was gone, replaced by a man I could no longer reach. Perhaps life would teach him lessons I could not. Perhaps one day he would look back and see what he had lost. But whether that day came or not, it was no longer my burden. What I knew was this: I was no longer living in fear of abandonment, no longer bending under the weight of manipulation. My days were filled with color, laughter, friendship, and peace. My nights were calm, not restless. For the first time in years, I belonged to myself. As the tea cooled in my hands, I whispered into the night, almost as a vow, I am enough. I always have been. And in that simple truth, I found the kind of love I had searched for in others all my life. The love of self, unbought and unbroken.